At 23, I was broke again. Not the kind of broke where you skip Starbucks, but the kind where you pray your gas tank holds out through the week. So when I spotted the Craigslist post, "Dryer won't spin, bring tools, cash ready," I didn't hesitate. The job was in Astoria, a quiet coastal town in Oregon where the houses wore wraparound porches and the air smelled of sea salt and old wealth. I pulled into a gravel driveway just past 6, my truck rattling to a stop like it was coughing its last breath. The main house was large and elegant, but tucked behind it stood a neat, unassuming guest house. That had to be the place. I grabbed my toolbox and headed up the path, only to have the door swing open before I could knock. "Elise?" I asked. She stood barefoot in the doorway, a glass of wine in hand, leaning against the frame like she'd been expecting me. There was something unshakably calm about her. Blonde hair loosely braided, dressed in simple jeans and a black tank top that somehow hit harder than it should have. "That's me," she replied. "You must be Caleb." I nodded, trying not to stare. "Come on in. Dryer's back here." Inside, the guest house smelled faintly of lavender and something warm I couldn't quite name. Candles flickered along the windowsill, casting a soft light over the peaceful space. Quiet. Not silent, like a place designed to be hidden from the world. She led me to a small laundry closet. The dryer was old but intact. As I crouched down, she joined me, her knee nearly brushing mine while she explained the problem. I half listened, already sliding the panel off. Snapped belt, humming motor, classic. I had a spare in the truck. Swapped it out, realigned the pulley, cleared out some lint. Elise lingered nearby, not hovering, just calmly present, leaning against the kitchen counter, asking now and then if I needed anything. Her voice was low and steady. 25 minutes later, I flipped the switch. The dryer came to life. She smiled. "That's magic." I stood and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Not magic, just a new belt." She tilted her head, looking at me in a way that suggested she was sizing something up. "You've got good hands," she said. I didn't know whether to take it at face value or not, so I nodded and tried to stay focused. "I can write you a check," she offered, opening a drawer. "Or cash, if that's easier." I hesitated. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk about that." She turned, curious. "Talk about what?" "The payment." Her expression didn't shift much, just a raised eyebrow, calm as ever. "I usually charge 50, I said, "but I drove in from Cannon Beach and the part wasn't cheap." She sipped her wine slowly, still studying me. "Okay, so what do you think is fair?" It wasn't a challenge. It felt more like a test. 75, I said, "but I'm open to whatever works for you." That's when she smiled. Not polite, not stiff, something else entirely. "I have a different idea," she said, setting her glass down. My heart stumbled, not because of the words, but because of how she said them, like she'd unlocked a door I hadn't even known was there. And for a second, I wasn't sure what kind of job I'd just walked into. I watched as Elise set her wine glass on the counter, slow, intentional, like she wanted every motion to register. "A different idea?" I asked, keeping my voice level. She stepped in a little closer, her bare feet silent on the cool tile, eyes locked onto mine. "You said 75, right?" she asked, already knowing the answer. I nodded. Then, just a few feet away, she leaned against the counter, her expression unreadable. "What if, instead of cash," she said, "I make you dinner?" The offer caught me off guard. "Dinner?" I echoed. She smiled slightly. "I'm a good cook, and something tells me you're not exactly dining fine in Cannon Beach." She wasn't wrong. My last few meals had been gas station food and whatever I could slap between bread. Still, I hesitated. "I appreciate it," I said, rubbing the back of my neck, "but I wasn't trying to—" She cut me off gently. "I know. I just think sometimes people pay in ways that matter more." Her tone was calm, steady, like this wasn't strange at all, like maybe she'd made offers like this before, or at least thought about it.
"And if I say no?" I asked. Elise gave a slow shrug. "Then I hand you $75 and thank you for the help." It didn't feel like a trap, but it wasn't just dinner either. The way she looked at me, like she already knew the answer, made my chest tighten. I let out a breath and smiled faintly. "All right, dinner sounds good." "Good," she said, brushing past me toward the fridge. "You're not allergic to anything, are you?" "Only bad decisions," I joked. She laughed, really laughed, and the sound filled the space like music. "Then you're probably not going to make it very long around me." There it was again, that soft tension beneath everything she said, like a low flame just waiting. I watched as she pulled out fresh ingredients with practiced ease: tomatoes, garlic, herbs, fresh pasta, and moved around the kitchen with quiet confidence. I offered to help, but she waved me off. "Sit, relax." So I did. The glow from the kitchen light mixed with the candlelight, making the guest house feel even warmer. The scent of rosemary floated through the air. I watched her cook, the rhythm of her movements, the way her braid slipped over her shoulder. She didn't use a recipe, didn't second guess, just moved like she belonged to the space. "You always pay people with dinner?" I asked. Without turning, she replied, "Only when I want them to stay a little longer." I leaned back, unsure how to respond, so I didn't. I just kept watching. Within 20 minutes, dinner was ready. Fresh pasta tossed in blistered cherry tomatoes, garlic, and shavings of what she called real Parmesan, not that crap in the can. She poured me a glass of wine, and we sat down at the small table by the window. It was easily the best meal I'd had in months. We ate mostly in silence, letting the clink of forks and the hush of the wind outside fill the gaps. Then came the questions. "Where'd you learn to fix things?" she asked. "My dad had a garage in Yakima. I was always crawling under cars, handing him wrenches." She nodded, slowly. "Do you miss it?" I shrugged. "Sometimes, but it wasn't the kind of place you stay." She studied me, like that answer gave away more than I intended. "What about you? What's your story?" Elise smiled, like she'd been waiting for me to ask. "No husband, no kids, no tragic backstory. I just like my space." I raised an eyebrow. "Not many people live in the guest house behind a mansion." "Technically," she said, twirling her fork, "it's all mine. Bought the big house years ago, but it felt too empty. So I moved into this one and rent the other one out." I nodded, impressed. She didn't fit any mold, and I was starting to realize Elise was full of quite surprises. After dinner, I stood to clear the plates. She didn't stop me this time. We moved side by side in the kitchen, washing, drying, stacking, like a team that had done this before. There was something quietly intimate in the rhythm of it all, unspoken but steady. As I dried the last plate, Elise leaned back against the counter, wine glass in hand again. "So, do we call it even?" I looked at her, heartbeat skipping like it had earlier. "Yeah," I said, "we're even." But we both knew that wasn't true. Something had shifted, something quiet and unfinished, hanging in the space between us.
I didn't leave right away, even though I probably should have. Dinner was done and she'd paid me in her own way, but something about the quiet after the meal made it hard to move. Elise was still leaning against the sink, sipping the last of her wine, and I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed, trying not to stare too openly. After a moment, she spoke. "You know, you're easier to talk to than most people I've hired." I smiled a little. "You don't usually wine and dine your repair guys?" She gave a soft laugh. "Most of them fix things and leave. You didn't." I raised an eyebrow. Was I supposed to? She shrugged, but there was weight in the gesture, like she wasn't sure herself. "Maybe." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, just dense, like something else was hanging between us. Then she pushed away from the sink. "Actually, there's one more thing, if you're still game." I followed her, half joking. "Another broken appliance?" She tilted her head. "Sort of."
Down the hallway, she opened a door to a bare, white room. It held a few cardboard boxes, a single window, and a short bookshelf still in its flat-pack box on the floor. I bought this weeks ago, but never put it together. Thought I'd save it for someone who knows what they're doing. I gave her a look. You saved it for me? She smiled. I had a feeling. That word lingered. Feeling. As I knelt beside the box and opened it, screws, tiny pegs, and vague instructions spilled out. Elise crouched next to me, her braids slipping over her shoulder. Need help? She asked. You offering? I replied. I'm supervising, she said with a playful smirk. Ah, so you're management now. Exactly. We sat side by side on the floor, sorting parts, building the shelf slowly. She stayed close, her arm brushing mine occasionally, her leg pressing gently when we shifted positions. None of it felt accidental. At one point, when I reached across her for a screwdriver, her hand caught mine. It was light, brief, but deliberate. When I looked up, she was watching me. Thanks for staying, she said softly. I didn't have anywhere better to be. She nodded, holding my gaze. Still, I'm glad you didn't rush off. For a second, I thought she might lean in. Maybe I should have, but we both just turned back to the task, pretending nothing had changed, though everything had. We finished the shelf in about 15 minutes. It stood straight, and that was good enough. Elise stretched, her tank top riding just enough to catch my eye. She asked, "Want another glass of wine?" Only if you're drinking too, I said. Always, she replied. Back in the living room, we sat on her small couch, each with a glass. She tucked her legs beneath her, arm draped over the cushion. I sat up too straight, unsure how relaxed I was allowed to be. Then she looked at me and said, "You don't flirt much, do you?" I blinked. I mean, I can? She laughed, a soft, genuine sound. It's not a complaint, just you're not trying anything. Most guys in your position would. I raised an eyebrow. In my position? She leaned her head back, watching me. Young, alone. After hours, in a woman's house, you're either very respectful or very unsure. I considered that. I guess I'm just not in a rush to make the wrong move. That made her pause. Her expression softened. You wouldn't, she said. I frowned slightly. Wouldn't what? Make the wrong move. And just like that, something shifted again. She didn't lean in, neither did I. But the space between us felt taut, like a wire pulled tight. I set my wine glass down. Elise, I began, not knowing what I was going to say. She leaned forward, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough. And then she kissed me.
It wasn't a hungry kiss. Not rushed, not clumsy. Just slow, intentional. Like she was giving me the chance to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't. Her lips were soft and warm, tasting faintly of wine and something sweeter. My hand moved instinctively, settling on the curve of her hip, resting there gently. She didn't shy from the touch. If anything, she leaned into it, pressing closer, deeper, until there was no space left between us. When she finally pulled back, it was only far enough to catch her breath, her forehead resting against mine. You okay? She whispered. I nodded. Yeah. You? She smiled, her voice quiet. You're a lot more patient than most guys your age. I raised an eyebrow, grinning. You say that like you've tested a few. She laughed softly, but there was something in it. Something real. I've had enough time to figure out what I don't want. And what do you want? I asked. That question gave her pause. Then she traced her fingers up my arm, slow and deliberate. Right now? She said, her voice dipping.
Right now, I want to stop pretending this hasn't been building since the moment you knocked on my door. I didn't have a clever comeback, so I kissed her again. This time, neither of us held back. Her hands slid up my chest, fingers slipping beneath the edge of my shirt. Her palms were warm, steady, and sent a ripple of heat through me. I barely had time to breathe before she pulled me down with her onto the couch, her body fitting perfectly against mine, like it had been waiting there all along. The rest of the night unfolded slowly, like we had all the time in the world. No fumbling, no awkward laughter, just steady hands, quiet sighs, and the rhythm of two people drawn together by something deeper than the moment. Candlelight flickered against the walls as her shirt slipped away, followed by mine. Skin met skin, breath met breath. In every space between our kisses, I could feel something more than just lust, a current neither of us could name, but both of us knew was there. At some point, we ended up in her bedroom. I don't remember walking there, just the feeling of her hand wrapped around mine, guiding me through the dark, like she knew exactly where I belonged. The bed was soft, the sheets cool. She pulled me in beside her, like she'd done it 100 times, and maybe she had. But this felt different. Familiar. Easy. I woke up before she did. It was still early, sky dark, the soft hush of the ocean drifting through the cracked window. Trees rustled gently outside. Elise was curled against me, her breath slow and even, head resting on my chest. One leg draped over mine, her hand tucked beneath my rib cage. The room smelled like her. Lavender, old candle wax, a trace of smoke, and something warm I couldn't quite name. Her robe hung from the closet door, one of my socks had somehow made it to the nightstand. I smiled to myself, content in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't mean to drift off again, but I did. Just long enough for the sun to rise and cast a soft amber light across the sheets. When I opened my eyes, she was already awake. She was watching me, calm, still, like she'd been doing it for a while. "Morning," I said, voice thick with sleep. Her lips curved into a small, sleepy smile. "Morning." We stayed like that, wrapped in quiet that didn't need filling. Then she spoke. "You didn't have to stay, you know." I turned my head to look at her. "Do you want me to go?" She shook her head. "No. I'm just not used to this." "Which part?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "The part where it doesn't feel complicated." I stared at the ceiling for a moment and said, "Maybe it doesn't have to be." She looked at me like she wanted to believe that. Like part of her already did, but didn't know how to say it. Then she shifted closer again, head tucked against my shoulder, her voice soft. "You make it feel easy." I kissed her hair. "So do you."
I stayed for breakfast. It wasn't something we talked about or planned, I just didn't leave. Still shirtless, hair messy from sleep, I found myself at her kitchen table, sitting in the kind of quiet that feels heavier than words. Elise moved through the small space barefoot, wrapped in a loosely tied robe, cracking eggs with one hand, flipping toast with the other. She hummed softly to herself, some tune I couldn't name, but didn't want her to stop. It felt natural, familiar, like this wasn't the first time we'd done this, like I hadn't just been a stranger fixing her dryer less than a day ago. "You like scrambled or over easy?" she asked, not looking back. "Dealer's choice," I replied. She glanced over her shoulder with a small smirk. "You're surprisingly easy to please." "I'm just not used to someone cooking for me," I said. "That's all." Elise smiled and turned back to the stove. "Get used to it. I hate eating alone." It was subtle, but it was the first time she hinted at something more, at a future. Not just a shared night, but shared mornings. I looked around the kitchen, the same warm glow from the windows, the same candles flickering faintly on the sill, and her, moving through it all like the space belonged to her entirely, without ever having to announce it.
How long have you lived here? I asked. She started plating the eggs and toast, answering over her shoulder. 6 years. Moved here to get away from a version of myself I didn't like anymore. And now? Now I mostly like the quiet. Then, after a breath, at least until some guy shows up to fix my dryer and doesn't leave. I laughed under my breath. You invited me to stay. Did I? She said with faux innocence, setting the plate in front of me. You bribed me with pasta and wine. And it worked, which says more about you than me. She wasn't wrong. We ate slowly, not needing to fill the air. Just the sound of forks and glasses, the occasional look that lingered longer than it had to. Her foot brushed against mine under the table and stayed there. I didn't move away. Afterward, I helped her with the dishes. She let me this time. No argument, no playful pushback, just quiet cooperation. Then came the moment, the one where the energy shifts, the unspoken "what now" settled between us. Elise tried her hands and leaned back against the counter, standing exactly where she had the night before. Her eyes found mine, steady. So, are we pretending last night didn't happen? I shook my head, not even a little. Her shoulders relaxed, her gaze softened. Good. We didn't kiss. It wasn't about that. Not this time. We just looked at each other like we'd silently agreed on something more. I've got a shift this afternoon at the parts store. Of course you do, she said with a teasing grin. Mr. Responsible. I smiled, stepping toward the door. I'll stop by later. She nodded, crossing her arms. Don't knock. Just come in. And those 3 words hit me harder than any kiss. It wasn't about the night anymore. It was about the invitation, the unspoken trust, the open door. She was letting me in, not just past the threshold, but into her quiet, carefully curated life. And that meant something.
The thing about falling into someone's life is that it never happens all at once. It's gradual, almost sneaky. A toothbrush left behind by accident, a hoodie she steals and never gives back, her wine glasses appearing in your sink like they'd always belonged there. My truck started showing up in her driveway more nights than not. A quiet rhythm built itself around us without either of us asking for it. During the day, I was under the hood of cars, oil changes, alternators, busted radiators, and at night, I found myself on Elise's porch, drinking whatever bottle of wine she'd picked up from the local shop, listening to the wind whisper through the trees. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't, but whether the words came or not, she made it easy to stay. On the 3rd night after it all began, I let myself in after work, just like she told me to. She was barefoot in the kitchen again, wearing a loose gray shirt that hung off one shoulder, music playing softly. Fleetwood Mac, something ghostly and gentle. And the lights were low, like she'd already set the tone for the night. Hey, I said. She turned and smiled like I'd never left. Beer's in the fridge, she called. Dinner's almost ready. What did I do to deserve this? I asked, grinning. You fixed my dryer, she replied with that signature smirk. That night, we didn't end up in bed. We sat on the couch with plates on our laps, laughing at a movie neither of us cared about. Her head found my shoulder, and I leaned into her in return. Words weren't needed. It was simple, quiet, easy. But not everything about that rhythm was comfort. About 2 weeks in, I showed up later than usual after a long, greasy shift. I expected to see her on the porch, barefoot, cigarette in hand, wine on the table, but the space was dark, empty, lights off, quiet. I knocked anyway, gently. No answer. The next morning, she texted me. Sorry, needed a night alone. Everything's okay. And I understood. I really did. Elise was her own person. No promises, no expectations, no labels. Still, it hit differently. The next time I saw her, she acted like nothing had changed. She handed me coffee, curled against my side, asked how my day had been like we hadn't missed a beat. I didn't bring up the night she disappeared. She didn't either. And maybe that was the problem. Because as steady and calm as she always seemed, Elise was still a fortress. And me? I wasn't sure if I was inside the gates or just leaning against the wall, hoping they'd eventually open. Things didn't fall apart, they just shifted. It was subtle at first, so slight I wondered if I was just imagining it. Elise still smiled when I walked through the door. She still curled up beside me on the couch, still brewed coffee in the morning like nothing had changed. But something had. I could feel it in the silences between us, stretched longer than before. Her touches grew lighter, more absent-minded. Sometimes she'd drift off mid-sentence, eyes glazing as they wandered toward the window, as if something beyond the glass was calling her away from me. The porch light that used to be left on for me, more often than not, it stayed dark. One Thursday night, I arrived late, rain clinging to my jacket after a long shift. I let myself in like always, but the place felt different. Quiet, dimly lit. I heard her on the back porch, barefoot, tucked under a blanket, cigarette in hand. She didn't hear me come in. For a moment, I just stood there in the doorway, watching her stare out into the night like she was waiting for something. Answers, maybe. "Elise," I said softly. She didn't turn, just said, "Hey." No smile, no warmth, just that flat, distant greeting. I stepped outside and sat across from her. Rain tapped lightly on the porch roof, while the smoke from her cigarette spiraled upward, lazy and slow. "You've been quiet lately," I said. She flicked ash into a tray. "Have I?" I nodded. "Not just quiet, far." She let out a breath through her nose. "Less frustration, more fatigue. It's not you." I didn't say it was. The silence that followed was thick, but not hostile, just full. Eventually she said, "I've done the part where things feel good, and I've done the part where it ends." She paused, looking out at the rain. "I'm not good at the part in between." That one hit deep. I sat with it for a second, then spoke carefully. "Elise, I'm not here to wreck anything. I'm not asking for promises. I just want you to stop disappearing every time this starts to feel real." Her mouth opened like she had something to say, but nothing came out. The cigarette burned low between her fingers. The blanket slipped off her shoulder a little, and she didn't bother fixing it. "I like having you here." 3 weeks after that night on the porch, I noticed something small. A toothbrush in her bathroom drawer that wasn't hers. Mine. Folded laundry on her bed that included one of my shirts, the one she always borrowed and never returned. The kind of details people miss when they're looking for fireworks instead of the slow burn. We hadn't had the conversation. No declarations, no labels. But we didn't need to. I was there every night that week. Sometimes I brought dinner, sometimes she made it. Sometimes we just split a bowl of cereal at midnight and watched reruns on her tiny TV, not saying much. My truck started spending more time on her driveway than outside my own place. And one Saturday morning, I woke up before she did. The light was coming in soft through the window, and she was still asleep beside me, hair a little messy, one hand resting gently on my chest, breathing slow and steady like she belonged there. I didn't move. I just watched her for a while. Because in that moment, I knew. This wasn't casual anymore. This wasn't a one-time thing or a phase or whatever label people put on something to keep it from meaning too much. This was something real, something earned. She stirred a little, half waking. "Hey," I whispered. Her eyes fluttered open. She blinked at the sunlight, then looked at me with that sleepy half-smile I'd come to know too well. "Hey." I brushed a piece of hair from her face. "You snore." "No, I don't," she murmured. I grinned. "A little." She rolled her eyes and closed them again, nuzzling in closer. "Don't ruin the moment, Caleb." I didn't. I just let it breathe. Because it didn't need fixing. Later that afternoon, we sat on the porch like we always did. She was in that old hoodie she stole from me. I had my coffee, she had her cigarette. Our chairs were close, hands occasionally brushing, knees touching when we shifted. The neighborhood was quiet. No cars, no dogs barking. Just the wind and the sound of something in my chest finally relaxing. She glanced over at me. "What?"
I asked. You really stayed. I looked at her, then at the house, then back to her. Yeah, I really did. She leaned over, kissed me once, slow and steady, and that was it. Not the end, just the beginning of something we'd both stopped believing in a long time ago.